On Friday, the 25th of August, I felt within myself a calling to go into prayer. I did not specifically tell anybody that I was doing this, but people in my life who I was speaking with knew that I had already been in a time of prayer and fasting for at least a week prior. A lot of things had happened over that week. It was a very busy week. And on top of it being a busy week, my grandparents had gotten into a car accident and a couple of other things that would be more of the traumatic side of life experiences. But I did not tell anybody that I was going to go into a secluded time of prayer. I didn't not tell anybody intentionally. It is very normal for me to just not speak to people for a few days, to lose my phone for a few days. I just kind of move as I feel, and I also see how that can cause confusion. But I put my phone in airplane mode and I put it on the charger, and I was listening, reading, and speaking as much scripture as I could remember, and praying fervently. I would say I was actually praying radically. I would also say that I was praying as much as my understanding of what the world system in comparison to God's system is that I could, and with fervent prayer for tyranny to be brought down and for Christ to be brought in, including the motif of being the bride of Christ, calling for her husband. This was all intentional. And while I would not say it was planned, I would also say I had thought through what I was going to do whenever I decided to do it. So, in that way, it was planned. But the timing of everything, I couldn't have possibly scripted. But I did let it play out in both my mind and my actions as if it were a movie, too. I'm saying all of those things to explain what behaviors and what radical faith in my expression of it looked like, and expressing my understanding on how that could look very, very different, scary, not okay to other people. And I do acknowledge that. I'm going to end the first message and start the next one, and that will be my opening statement. After my time of prayer and fasting, I laid down to sleep, and I did not sleep very long, probably only a couple of hours. Something woke me up out of my sleep. In hindsight, it could have easily been a noise outside, my air conditioner kicking on. It could have been any number of things. But what it felt and heard and was experienced by me as was the sound of women and children in distress, in danger, crying, screaming for help. And it is just as likely that it was a dream as anything else, especially considering I have been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and have known and experienced within myself that when I become startled out of sleep, I can have very, very extreme reactions. But when I thought that I heard that, I immediately left my house, whether that was wise or not, to go and check on my neighbors who I know have women and children. Because I needed to. I feel pretty confident that there's a good chance that I was frantic because I was scared that something was wrong. Probably isn't also the wisest idea to have just gone outside to look. I will give that also. But I have always handled my own problems on my own and always desired to come to the aid of those who need it. So what happened happened. And what seems to have occurred is that I did frighten one of my neighbors, and they contacted the police. When the police came out to the house the first time, I was outside already. But they can attest to, as well as all the body cam footage, that I was perfectly calm. And I explained to them exactly what I just said to you all. And so there was no issue, and they drove away. After that point, I tried to lay back down but failed. And I was a little bit in distress because I didn't know if I had actually heard people in danger or not. I was upset that the police hadn't checked anything else other than me. They hadn't been concerned about my claims at all. And I was sad. So I went back into prayer because that's what I do. I did try to go back to sleep though. I just couldn't that time. So a little while passed, and my mom, who hadn't heard from me for a couple of days, was concerned. It's not abnormal for us to not talk for a couple of days, but I think that maybe given other circumstances, she was concerned and already on the way to the hospital that's only 10 minutes away from me, and so she came by the house. My mother had also been through a whole lot in the previous weeks and months. A lot of distress, a lot going on. And I think that when she saw me, that there was a misunderstanding about the state that I was in, and maybe my safety to myself or others. I know that I was not a danger to myself or others, and I know that I was actually in a very right state of mind. Even if it was an extreme state of mind, I was not out of my mind, nor was I unable to communicate or express. I was very calm. Calm does not have to mean quiet. But my mother didn't know what to do. And so she also called, thinking she was calling an ambulance. I do not agree with this decision at all. For me, I feel like I would have preferred to have been sat down with for an hour or given some time and space. But the concern was that I was not okay. And I don't hold that against anybody. But this is where things went really badly. Because while my neighbor's having a slight concern, and then the cops checking in with me and everything being fine, and them not checking anything and being on their way, now with there being a second call from a family member, it's an escalated situation. So when the cops arrived, there was not really any more talking. They walked up to me, we had the same brief type of interaction, and then they cuffed me and put me in the back of the car. I went calmly. I did not resist. I did not yell or scream. I did not lose my mind. I simply told them that they were wrong and that they shouldn't be doing this and whatever. So they sit me in the back of the car, and they say they're doing that to have conversations and figure things out. Next thing I know, I'm being toted away to what I assume is the hospital. Because nobody tells me anything. I'm not read my rights. I'm not informed of anything. I'm not asked if I need anything. I'm only wearing, at this point, a white throw-on dress. I'm not dressed properly. I have nothing with me. I'm just hauled away. You can also check the dash cam footage to see that I was very calm in the car and ministering to both of the police officers. Actively ministering while I was being hauled away. That will be what you see on the dash cam footage. You will not see me yelling or screaming or fussing or fighting or losing my mind or out of my mind. You will see me calmly ministering to and calling to repentance and new life the two officers. And then we arrive at the hospital, and I will start the next message from there. By the time we are at the hospital, whether you want to consider this part delusion or not, I am actively convinced that I have entered into a very serious spiritual war, because otherwise I just can't comprehend what's going on. But that's the only type of thing along the lines of paranoia that I was feeling by this point. I wasn't even paranoid. Just actively observing what was really happening in real time. But it changed a little bit after what I received and what happened at the hospital. When I got to the hospital, I was taken into a secluded area that I had never seen of before, and put in a room that was essentially half the size of a normal hospital room without any of the normal amenities at all, and a very weird steel door on the left-hand side, almost as if I were in a storage unit or a garage. It was very cold, very uncomfortable. I was given no food or water, wasn't offered anything, I wasn't asked anything. And they just kept coming and telling me that I needed to get blood work done, that I needed to do all of these things, and I was actively refusing all of it. I was actively refusing any treatment, any help, anything they asked me to do, until I understood why I was supposed to be doing it. And so they just kept leaving me for hours at a time, and then coming back and demanding it, and then leaving again. I think eventually after about 6 hours or so, a doctor came in, and I was very ornery and sarcastic with him because I was frustrated, so that's also accurate. But I essentially kept asking him why I needed to do it. He couldn't give me an answer. Kept asking him if I was safe. He couldn't give me an answer. He basically just kept telling me, you have to do this. You have to do this. You have to do this. That's what everybody just kept saying. You have to get blood work. You have to take this medication. You have to stay here. I wasn't allowed to, leave the room. I couldn't walk or pace the hallways. I had to ask permission to go to the bathroom. I was being monitored. There was security. And there were other patients in there who were very obviously in various states of being absurdly drugged up. Just out of their minds drugged up. And boy, was it terrifying. Because I could see, it's like, no, these are not people who are, these aren't people who are having a delusion or a psychotic break or something. Whatever this is a drug. Whether it's a drug they took and then came in, or they were given it, they are on drugs. And it was terrifying because they kept telling me, you have to take medication. Well, I see what's going on around me, and I am not trying to be out of my mind like I see all around me. And it was terrifying. I am still also actively in the motif in my mind of being the bride of Christ calling for her husband. That's just where I was. I understand that part might sound crazy, but if it is, it's religiously crazy. And if it's a problem, it's a problem. But to me, all of this is religious persecution because all I'm doing is praying. So at one point, I go to the bathroom, and when I'm walking back, one of the patients in the room cries out for me for help. They say help, like literally, but not like that. They say it the way you would say it if you were really out of your mind, drugged up. And this is the moment when I think I was pink slipped. Because when that happened, I looked and said, what are you doing with my husband in there? Because my mind saw God. One of God's kids, one of God's own, one of God's sons was locked up in there crying out for help. That's what my mind heard. I'm not married. I've never been married. But I did yell, what are you doing with my husband? I basically stood my ground against what I saw as absolute tyranny. Absolute tyranny. And when that happened, I was grabbed up. I was literally grabbed up. When I was grabbed up, I went stiff. And I actively was saying, I do not consent, I do not consent, I do not consent, I do not acknowledge, I do not acknowledge. And they just kept saying, we don't care. That's fine, okay. Took me into a room, grabbed a couple of needles of something, and stabbed me twice in the leg with them. And from this point on, I was out of my mind. Because from this point on, I was drugged to high hell. Drugged up to high hell. They took my blood work. I know they did that. And then around midnight, they came and took me out of the room and took me in an ambulance to another location, to a hospital. Well, what they called a hospital or a mental facility, I suppose. When I got to the mental facility, they took me into this waiting room, and the waiting room just had 2 chairs in it and a little table, if I remember correctly. No bed, no food, no coffee, no tea, no water. I think at some point they offered me some Lay's potato chips. It's like, I'm not gonna eat that right now, but no fruit, no information. Nobody told me where I was or why I was there. None of that. And I was in that room for 6 hours. So understand, I was picked up the morning, Saturday the 26th. And now we're talking about Sunday at 6 a.m. And I have not been able to rest. I have not been informed. I have not been given my rights. I have not been fed. I have not been watered. And I have been drugged up against my will. And they just keep coming into this room and telling me that I have to sign these papers. And that if I don't sign these papers, I'm not going home. And I say, I'm going home. They're like, well, you're not going home tonight. You have to stay. And you have to sign these papers to get your bed. And I kept saying, what are these papers? And they're saying, you have to sign the papers. Nobody will explain anything to me. And I'm an excellent reader. And I can't read because my eyes are blurred from the drugs. I'm not offered any assistance. I'm not offered any advocacy. Nothing. So after 6 hours of that, I caved. I wish I hadn't. I wish I had stuck it out. Because I'm capable of it, but oh my God, I was so tired. And the worst part is I had literally just told my mom 2 days prior, with some hospital shit, not to sign anything. But at this point, they did take me into the facility, and they took me to a bed, and there was another woman also completely drugged up in that bed, or in that room. And I will make the next one next. This whole thing is very difficult for me to do. I actually just got home from this ordeal, but I know that it's going to be the freshest on my mind right now, so that's why we're doing it in these pieces like this, but man, this is a lot. So at the facility, they take my clothes and my jewelry and everything else from me. I never had shoes or socks, and they gave me a gown, so I'm also naked. And in the morning, I find that I'm essentially in a unit with 23 other patients, so 24 total. Complete strangers, men and women, young and old. There was a young man in there as young as 18, and then there were men in there in their 50s. Same with the women from all walks of life. And I'm just there, and I don't know why, and I don't know what for, and I don't know what it is, and I'm not getting any information. And every time I ask anybody for information, they say I have to wait till I see the doctor, I have to wait till I see the psychiatrist, or just always pushing it off. And I also am still not right in my mind with drugs. At some point in the morning, they come and they take my vitals and they hand me pills, and I'm still just drugged. I'm drugged up. I'm high as fuck. And like, I've been clean and sober from anything except for marijuana and some alcohol for a long time. But I used to fuck with drugs, so I know what it feels like to be drugged up. And I was drugged up. And the worst part about it is like, it felt like the very few times in my life that I had Percocets, like right after my car accident. It felt like a crazy benzo high or a crazy opioid high, just so loopy. And ironically, I'm just praising God that I happen to really still have a decent amount of my wits about me, even when I'm high like that. But I'll tell you what, once I was in that spot, I just didn't care anymore. It's like, all right, I'm naked, fine, I don't care. Y'all can all see that, I guess. Oh, what? It's cold? Fine, I guess that's just what it is. Like, no blankets? Oh, yeah, okay, I guess that's what it is. No, like, oh, no food? Okay, I guess that's what it is. Just whatever. I knew that it was a facility and they were having these groups, but it was like, I'm not going to these groups, and nobody told me I needed to be going to the groups or what they were for. Just no information. No information at all. At all. So, I'm drugged, hungry, naked, and in a group of strangers, and I guess that's supposed to be an environment for me to get well if I was sick, and a way for it to go. I wasn't given any information about anything. But a couple of the patients really looked out, and they let me know a couple of things. They let me know a couple of things, like that the groups matter for participation, and that it's a mental facility, and that, how the smoke breaks work. And, like, honestly, they held me down. Like, my brothers and sisters in there, as they were, held me down, including some of the staff. Because the staff throughout this entire experience very clearly had very little authority or room to actually do anything, but the ones that held me down, they really held me down. So I was there for that Sunday and then the following day. And it wasn't great, but it also wasn't bad. The people in there were cool. The food was smooth once meals started. And they had vegetarian options for me. That's cool, whatever. But I just still never got any information. And then Monday morning, here comes Ryan, the social worker, telling me that I need to come with him and leave to another unit. And I get back to refusing because I've never been accepting any of it the whole time. So I say, no, sir, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go home. And he was like, well, ma'am, you're not going home. And after a whole lot of calmly protesting that, I was able to sit down with him in the rec room, and he explained to me that I had been pink slipped and that I had to be there for a certain amount of time, but that they couldn't keep me there and I had to go to another unit. He then also showed me the paperwork I signed, which is apparently me voluntarily signing myself in. I explained to the social worker I did not voluntarily do that, and I explained to him as much of what I just explained to you all as I could, and he essentially said, that's very nice, time to go. It's worthy of note that the other woman that was in my room literally did not move that entire time that I was there, to the point that I mentioned it to the nurse and to the staff that I was very concerned for her, that she hadn't gotten up for food or the bathroom or group or spoke or anything. But Another one of the patients essentially gave me the advice of going with them, because if they had to yank me out of there, it would probably be way worse, and that they would. I went with the advice. But I throughout the entire experience from here on now, I kept saying, I am calmly doing as you ask under threat, duress, and stress. I repeated that phrase over and over and over again to everybody. But they took me to another unit at this point, and this unit was nothing like the other one. This unit was like hell compared to heaven. If in a facility like that there can be a heaven versus a hell, that is what happened. And I'm going to start the next message now. If at any point I should have gone to court, spoken to a judge, or seen or heard anything about that, it was kept from me, even as I asked. That is also worthy of note. At one point, something about probate was mentioned, but I was never taken before anybody in any way, and I also asked about that several times. And from this point on, until the day that I was released today, Ryan did not speak to me again, no matter how many times I tried to speak to him. In fact, when I left today, I said, Ryan, you did a phenomenal job of avoiding me all week. And he said, did I? I'm sorry. And I said, thank you. I forgive you. At the first unit I was in, there was coffee all day, and it became decaf at 4. There was a big bowl of fruit in the rec room all of the time. There was a juice machine. There was water. There were games. There was coloring materials and crafts. There was stuff to do. And things were nice. They were kept up nice. They were clean. They seemed reasonable. It was a very restrictive space in a lot of senses, but it also wasn't in others. We only were able to go outside for about 15 minutes at a time, 3 or 4 times a day, only allowed a certain amount of smokes. There was a lot of restrictions, but it wasn't completely unpleasant to be in. There was always snacks. There was always some kind of game to do. You could use the phone pretty easily. It was just still obvious that you were not free. You weren't free at all. Like, you couldn't just, walk out into another hallway. You couldn't leave. You couldn't ask really questions. You couldn't get information. But you could at least be comfortable in your captivity. The second unit was nothing like that. The second unit was bare in comparison, with next to nothing, literally as far as seating and tables, and also as far as games and cards. There was no coffee except for at breakfast in the morning. The juice machine was weird. I don't know how to explain it other than that. There was very limited snacks. They had snacks, but it was very limited. And the fruit was even more limited. The snacks were things like a string cheese and a fig Newton bar. Or, we might get a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and a string cheese and a fig Newton bar, some shortbread cookies. Just, I don't know, little kids' snacks, literally. And nobody in this unit knew why they were there. The schedule that was given out changed every single day. There was no consistency. There was no continuity. There was even less information to be had. You could not find or get a hold of a doctor or a psychiatrist or a nurse practitioner or a social worker. The staff that was actually running the floor was there, but they were so limited in what they knew and were able to do. You were just always waiting on these other people who were never around. And everybody in the unit was in the same position, where they didn't really understand why they were there, why they didn't really know how long they would be there, what they needed to be doing, what was expected of them. It was just this free-for-all. I had learned in the previous unit that we were supposed to have a morning meeting every day, that you needed to attend the group therapies for participation, that the rec room doors should be closed. There was a lot of things that I knew because of my couple of days in the other unit that were never explained ever to anybody, including myself, in either of the units, and most of that stuff did not happen in that second unit. We didn't have group meetings most mornings. Even if we did in the morning and we did the first half of the paper, we would never do the other half at night. The schedule changed radically every day. Some days there was a wake-up call, some days there wasn't. Some days it was at 6 a.m., some days it was at 7:30 a.m. It was all over the place. It was complete chaos, from the scheduling to the rooms, to the room orders and the people that were put together. And there was just no actual treatment going on. You would get called up to take your meds with no explanation of what they were or why they were or what they were treating you for. You would never actually get an assessment with a doctor or a psychiatrist, but then be prescribed all of these things. And if you didn't take them, they would tell you, you're not going to be able to leave if you don't take your medicine. And I would say, well, what's my medicine for? And they would say, essentially nothing, that I needed to talk to the doctor about that. Well, okay, then I'm not taking it till I talk to the doctor. That was my whole thing. I'm not going to take some random medication without knowing what and why. I'm not going to just acquiesce to the request when I don't know. I just started finally feeling sober again about maybe Monday afternoon, Monday evening into Tuesday from all of the injections and shit that I had experienced over the weekend. And now that I'm clear-headed, I am surely not anxious to just swallow whatever it is that you want to hand me. I'm not actually completely anti-pharmaceutical, though I am a naturalist, but I am absolutely anti-tyranny and anti-whatever was going on in this situation with just shoving things at people and locking them up with no information. It was an environment that would induce chaos. And I'm going to start another message. So from Monday until Friday, that's basically how it went. Wake up. There's a certain routine that doesn't change, like breakfast, lunch, and dinner stays the same. Smoke breaks mostly stay the same. And then I was just doing my damnedest to keep up with the schedule changes every day, because I was aware of the fact that they cared about it. And I was attempting to inform the other patients of that too, and trying to maybe even enforce some of the not enforce, but enact some of the rules that I had learned in the other unit in order to come alongside of all of the unit. So things like closing the rec room doors or just letting people know group was starting, just stupid stuff like that, because to me, we're all in it together. Nobody in there really understood what was going on. You had everything in there from traumatized, obsessive compulsive, anxious, to battered women, to manic depressive. You just run the gambit. There was every type of person from every type of background in there, but all of us were in the same boat of not having a clue, not actually getting treatment, just being there, just being in there. And that produced so much stress. There was so many different times where, at one point somebody would just lose their top and then the whole floor would erupt. And there would be all sorts of yelling and screaming and fighting and everything that is the opposite of what you need to get well mentally, with no place that you can go for privacy or quiet. And you're not allowed to just go outside and be outside for a little bit and get some fresh air because that's scheduled. Just lockdown, like jail. At one point, a gentleman in there that I made friends with, he started throwing a fit saying, I've been to every jail in Ohio, take me to any of them, it would be better than this. And he meant that. I know he did. I talked to that man a lot. He told me a lot about his life, and he was screaming for them, take me to county. So Monday through Friday, I'm just coasting. I'm just going, and I'm refusing the medications actively. I'm basically saying every time they ask me anything, I'm just saying I don't need anything but to go home. So Friday finally comes, and I finally sit down with the doctor. And she does apologize at this point. She did apologize for not having seen me, and explained to me that if I didn't take the medication prescribed, that she had the court-ordered authority to give me shots. I said, why? She said, well, because your family and your neighbors called thinking that you were a danger to yourself. And I was like, did they actually call thinking I was a danger to myself? Or, like, what is it that they actually said? Like, was there a court? Did I miss a court date? What is going on here? And I basically got nothing further than it's this or the shot. And I know what the shots did to me. So I'm not doing the shots. So I have a conversation with this woman, and she tells me that if I take a dose of Seroquel, 50 milligrams a day for the next 3 days and do well, then I can go home on Monday. So I tell her, well, ma'am, I really don't need medication, and I've been down this road before, and I've actually been doing excellent. I've been in here assisting, coming alongside of administering to all of the patients. I truly do not need anything. But if you are telling me the only way I can go home is to do this, let's figure out what it is you want to give me. She then explains to me that with my brain injury and my history of traumatic experiences, that she thinks it might be wise for me to take a 50 milligram dosage of Seroquel that's a medication that you take for schizophrenia. I've never even been close to diagnosed with anything like schizophrenia. I do not hear voices. I don't hear voices, and I don't hallucinate. The only time I have hallucinated is when I've done hallucinogenics when I decided to do stupid shit as a kid. So, I'm even more confused, but I understand that she's getting her information and her diagnosis information from my father, because that's the only person she has the authority to speak to. And I understand that it's very likely for my dad to just assume that what I'm going through is what he went through. So, okay, my dad takes this medication. You're telling me 3 days. You promised me 3 days and I can go home Monday. I'll do it. So, the next 3 days, all hell breaks loose. All hell breaks loose. I'm actually going to start another message because these 3 days are just unbelievable. So first off, a man is brought in who is absolutely, completely out of his mind in the moment. Whether it's from the drugs they gave him or something he did to himself or exhaustion, I don't know. But this man is enormous, and this man is aggressive, violent, and angry. And the entire first night that he is there, he is slamming in and out of other patients' rooms, attacking them in their sleep, and all sorts of absolutely wild behavior. They put the man on 24/7 watch, supposedly, and a man sits outside of his door the entire morning, but he continues to come in and out. At one point, this man exposed himself to me and was simply blocked by a couple of men until he walked himself back to his room. And once he went to sleep, they stopped monitoring him. On top of that, there was a woman there who had been through an unbelievable trauma and was not doing well. And this woman would go in and out of rooms and just make accusations and all the like, and they ended up putting her into my room, and she was sifting all through my clothes, taking my things. She took my apples and threw them against the wall. She was writing on the wall and writing stickers on the wall. I have PTSD. The whole thing is that when I wake up out of my sleep startled, something bad can happen. So now you're putting me on a brand new medication that I've never had before, that I don't know how I'm going to react to. And I'm in a room with a patient who is actively doing a lot of things to trigger anybody, much less me. At a certain point, she kept touching me in my sleep, and I had to go up to the front desk and say, y'all have to do something about this. If I get yanked out of my sleep and have a bad reaction, it looks bad on me. So How out of my mind and how in need of help can I be that in this situation I'm still able to be the calm, rational voice of reason? Tell me at what point in time you hear about somebody else. At what point in time are you hearing about somebody who needs help here? I'm actively helping at every point, even though I am going through all of my own personal worst nightmares in one fell swoop. They end up giving that woman a shot and knocking her the fuck out. And I hate that. I hate that that's the only thing that they could do and that that's what they did to her. And it just got worse from there. The next morning, they did move me to another room. That experience was better. The woman that I was rooming with in that room and I had a much kinship in the fact that she was deep in prayer also, deep in the word also. And I think that she needed more assistance than she was getting, and every time that she would ask for help, they would use it against her to say that she wasn't ready to go home. And that also just devastated my heart. On Saturday or Sunday, on Sunday, I believe, a full-blown riot broke out. There was two gentlemen that were arguing back and forth who basically had just been making fun of each other too much to the point where they were amped up. And another gentleman who had been too anxious and kept causing a fuss had been locked up and cooped up, and he snapped at the same time. When all of that occurred, this young 20-year-old kid attempted to come up to assault and attack an older woman, and all of it broke out at once. Just a full-blown riot on the floor. Fists swinging, people yelling and screaming, stuff getting thrown. I found myself standing between that young man and the old woman because as much as I'm positive he could have beat me, he wasn't actually tough. And so just me standing there was enough to hold him back, but there was no security. There was no security on the floor, and every single person who actually actively caused a problem had done so numerous times and had never been removed from the facility. The man who came for that older woman had already done that earlier in the day. The man who started swinging and starting a fight had already done it earlier in the day. At one point, one of the patients actively assaulted a staff member. Attacked him. He had to hold him down, get him into the room, get him shots. That's all they would do, just give you a shot till you go to sleep, and then leave you there again. Talk about inducing trauma, mania, crisis. And then when that fight broke out, they punished the entire unit with not being able to go outside and said outside was a privilege and this, that, and the third, as if we actually literally were prisoners. And it just got really, really bad from there. Throughout the entire week, whenever we would go outside, I would take my socks and shoes off once I got clothes. I didn't get clothes until Thursday. I wasn't allowed to add anybody to my visitation list or to have the right to talk to me or to do anything until Wednesday. So my father was able to bring me things Thursday, but from the first Saturday until Thursday, I was just naked in my gown, barefoot. And then from then on, I had clothes and smokes and things. But when we would go outside, I would take my socks off and I would stand in the grass or sit in the grass and breathe. I would breathe and pray and meditate. I would ground myself. I spent the entire week in prayer. That's it. I spent the entire week in prayer, and oftentimes other patients would join me. I had an opportunity to speak with all of the patients. I made relationships with all of them. I tried to come alongside of them. They all tried to come alongside of me. We truly formed a family in there, the best that we could. There was a lot of squabbling and a lot of anxiety and a lot of crisis, and nobody knew what was going on. It was an environment that would make anybody lose their mind. But I would talk with people, and we would talk about just our own experiences and how we were feeling and what our relationship with God as individuals looked like, and just that's how I spent my time. Going to the therapies as much as I could, trying to get information, etc., etc., etc. But there was a lot of love between the patients too. Even though those fights would break out, there was a lot of love, a lot of sharing, a lot of people from all walks of life coming together. And that was really beautiful. There was a lot of people ministering to each other, a lot of people giving each other God's encouragement. The gentleman who was screaming that he would rather go to county, take him anywhere but here, by the end of the week, that man had a Bible and a Quran in his hand, and he was reading them like crazy. And he was wanting to look for other scriptures to get into, and there was a lot of just that across the board. There was. God was very present. And God sustained us and sustained me and provided for us and provided for me. And so did the nursing staff. Like the nursing staff knew that I really needed my coffee, so they'd let me, get some of my coffee back to my room in the morning since we couldn't have it. And, the lunch ladies understood that I really wasn't trying to eat the food, so they made sure I had a really good vegetarian meal and let me take as much fruit in the kitchen, like from the kitchen bowl, to eat as I wanted. Like, God provided so much. I never didn't have a smoke. I don't really smoke cigarettes anymore. I've honest to God been doing really good with them, but trust and believe I was smoking in there, and there was always a community smoke, always somebody willing to give me one until I had some of my own. Like, the way that I was provided for and sustained through this was just so glorious, and the people that I met are so glorious. I have met lifelong family and friends and loved ones out of this that I couldn't be more grateful for. I could not be more grateful for them. But that environment in totality was actually hell. Actually hell. My room was full of dust and cobwebs and spiders. There were bugs everywhere. I do not trust the kitchen as much as I did trust the staff. It was not clean. People didn't it was not daily that your bathroom would get cleaned. It was not even close to, it was not even every other day. You could get toiletries and things like that, but you had to ask for them. You needed to ask to be put on the phone list. You needed to ask to be put on the shave list. Just, man, it was deep. And I know that there were people in there that did actually need help. Like, there were people in there that did actually need help, but they surely weren't getting it there. I think some people really did find help in each other and in what they were able to do and use their time with. And some things I really do have positive things to say about. I thought the music therapy was great. I thought the art therapy was great. But there was no actual psychotherapy. There was no actual... A lot of times the stuff on the schedule didn't even happen. And the psychotherapy was definitely not any actual cognitive behavioral therapy. It would just be one little workbook that you would do with a whole group, men and women, no matter what just not validating, it's not a safe environment for what they were wanting from people. They're putting people in an environment that would make them sick and demanding they get better or they can't go home. If you've got somebody who's manic depressive and really needs things to be orderly and scheduled, just that schedule situation is going to keep them from being able to get well. It'll keep anybody from being able to get well. Not getting an hour of sunlight a day is unhealthy for any human population. You need it. you need it. So we're also literally not getting scientifically what we need to be well. And I think we were given enough food, but certainly not any type of bounty. It was a prison. So Monday came, and at first, I don't know if the doctor was 100% ready to let me go. And I explained to her what I have explained to you guys throughout this entire thing, that I have been on a mental health journey for 10 years, that I have been doing cognitive behavioral therapy, that I have been doing the work, that I weaned myself off of meds because I did not need them, not because I was anti-psychiatrics, that my natural medicines actually work, that I am well and just belong to God, and that unfortunately, a woman very deeply and radically in prayer was too much for the world. But that from that point forward, if that's not understood, it is religious persecution, and I will be stating it as such. That I have been held against my will, that I have only done what is demanded of me, and that I have filed complaints everywhere that I can because my Father has come alongside of me in that way, and I will be following up with all of that and filing a lawsuit. And I will be following a lawsuit, because in the past week I experienced being stripped and bare, stolen from, sexually accosted, touched and tampered with in my sleep. I have not been safe. Every one of my patient rights has been violated, as well as everybody else in that unit. And it's understood, it's known. The people in there who know desperately want to fix it too. There are people in there who know what's going on and they want it to be better. And so do I. And the one thing I've always known about things getting better is you gotta say what's real. You gotta say what's real. So maybe I was delusionally in prayer. Maybe it was pretty radical. Maybe some stuff in that happened. But you ask anybody in that facility, anybody, ask any doctor, any staff, any patient, ask anybody who met Rachel Rene over the last 9 or 10 days or week plus, whatever it was. You ask anybody who met me, what was Rachel like? And they're going to tell you I held him down. They're going to say she had my back. She was pleasant. She was lovely. She was checking on people. She wanted things to be better, because I do. Because I do. Because I do. Because I truly am consecrated in my own mind as part of the bride of Christ. My life is God's, wherever my life is. Whether I am safely at home on my couch or whether I am imprisoned in a mental facility, I belong to God. That does not mean I'm perfect. It doesn't mean it doesn't look pretty crazy sometimes. But I'm not crazy. And God is so good. And now I'm home and safe with my babies and my animals. Sorry, my babies are my animals. I am tired. I know I'm going to be the most clear right now, so I'm getting it out now. And then I can transcribe and add to it and do everything else with it later. But, kind of like with Luke Acts, this is very much both a legal court document for me and my statement of faith to anybody who has any interest of hearing it. But ask about me, and ask about the other people in there, because they held it down too. Man, I'm just not going to speak other people's names so that they can keep their privacy, but there were people in there doing the Lord's work, doing God's work, patients, coming alongside of patients, staff, figuring out ways to accommodate so that people can feel better. Just, there were God's children in the midst. And I hope that when this gets out, and the people that hear it, do ask about it, that they see the glory of God. And I pray that through this, there is an opportunity for tyranny to be brought down and for that place to actually be blessed and become the mental health facility it could be, instead of the evil, tyrannical prison it currently is. I pray it so. I pray it so. I pray it so. I left a list of suggestions when I left today, and I let the staff know that I was more than willing to come alongside with more, that I have ideas. And I do, and I mean it, but it must be fixed. The people must be compensated. The rights must be returned. We need to remove the King of Tyre from his seat wherever he sits and put the husband back on the throne. And that is where I was, am, and will remain. But I am sorry for anybody that I scared, or who has been worried about me, or who doesn't believe me still. I am sorry for the contention that must be, but it is who I am, and it is as I sit. I'm very committed. I'm so committed. I am God's daughter. There is only one God. I abide in the Spirit. My body is healing and regenerating. My mind is being renewed to God's law. My spirit is being grown into adulthood. I hold my own authority, but only move out of God's authority and command. Servitude is becoming stewardship, and I and my house and our families are held by God. I did forget to mention a couple of important things. 1, nothing was found in my system at the time when my original blood work was done other than THC at all. I had not been binge drinking, I was not taking any other drugs, and I was not and am not on any other medications because I don't need them. I need my daily practices and the support of love and family, caring about me and spending time with me. Nothing was in my system other than marijuana, THC. We were not allowed to have our phones. We were not allowed to get on the internet. There was no computer, no tablets, no nothing. We had to share 2 phones that frequently one or both would go missing. And you could add visitors and people could leave you messages. People could leave you messages on a phone line, but the messages were never really given out. So I received 3 messages that were left in a voicemail for me, and I know for a fact that a lot more than that were left for me, but I did not receive them. And when I did receive them, I did not get to listen to a voicemail. I read a transcription of the voicemail that was printed automatically on the printer and then handed to me. When I would have been able to have visitors, I wasn't allowed to add visitors to the list. And the second time that there would have been visitors, they were putting me on that brand new medication, and I didn't know how that medication would impact me. So considering the fact that I already was in a not great environment and mental state with, even if I had my calm, I was still just traumatized, and starting a new medication, I did not trust having visitors the second time I would have been able to. So I was also completely isolated from my loved ones. When I took the medication, when I took the Seroquel, within about 20 or 30 minutes, my eyes would go out on me and I couldn't see straight. I got groggy, I got dizzy, and I was irritable. So while the entire week, the whole week, I had been able to remain calm through everything I described to you, the first night that they made me take a medication, I found myself having to seclude myself from even the other patients because I was so irritable. And that was the hardest night, because even if I had been isolated from everybody else, I had had that unity with the patients, and when they made me take this medication, I couldn't trust myself that first evening around anybody, and so then I was actually isolated and alone. Luckily, by the next morning, enough of it was out of my system and I could slam enough coffee that I could bypass it, and I was able to be okay more. But that was also when things escalated the absolute most, was over the weekend, and it was just such a bad time. No doctor followed up with me on Saturday and Sunday about how I was doing with my new medication. There was just no treatment. There was no treatment, ever. This was not a treatment facility. This was a jail for patients that they had deemed to be mentally out of their mind. This was a prison for quote-unquote crazy people. That's just what this was. And I'm not sure if it's because I had actually proved I wasn't crazy, so they had to get me out of there, or if my insurance that they were racking up was running out, or what actually got me out when I got out, which is today, Monday, Labor Day. I don't know for sure, but I know that I never needed to be there, and I was never treated, and the treatment I did receive made me worse, and the entire environment was unsafe, scary, cold, dreary, and a lockdown situation. They would constantly tell patients, you're going home today, and then not do it, and not really explain why. Just mind games, just a mess. I'll probably think of more, but that's what I have for now. And God is good all the time, and all the time God is good. God is greater. I experienced that, but boy did I experience a hell. It's now my second day at home, first morning at home. I had a great night's sleep after finally really being able to relieve myself in the bathroom. I had been constipated pretty much the entire time that I was there, likely primarily from dehydration and a lack of salt and proper fruit and vegetable content. Also, the toilet was really high and hard for me to do what I needed to do on. So when I got home yesterday, I spent the entire day hydrating and working to get my system going again, and getting the messages together that I compiled yesterday, and resting, and thanking God that I was home and that I am home. When I got here, everything I needed was here. Fresh towels and linen, the laundry was done. I don't know how to thank God and my loved ones enough who held me down through this. Looking through my Ring camera, I do notice my neighbor coming up to my mailbox for some unknown reason. My last message cut off, I'm not sure why, but there's one day where my neighbor comes up to check my mailbox. One day when a very dear friend of mine comes to check on me because they haven't heard from me. And then my father in and out, because he's the one with the key and the one who's been holding it down with the animals and everything for me primarily. I'm sure my mother's been coming alongside, but I still haven't spoken to her yet as of this moment. I don't know why my neighbor would have been coming up to my house. I have not heard from her. She did not send me any messages or phone calls saying that she was checking my mail or anything of the like, so I'm suspicious of that, and I'm making notation of that in this message. But after a really good night's sleep, after emptying my bowels and having a phenomenal night's sleep at home safely with all of my own natural methods, I am awake and fresher and clearer, and I have some additional notations and things that I am remembering that I don't think that I mentioned. I'm going to start another message now so I can regather my thoughts to talk about those things. I'm not sure if it will be a narrative format or more like bullet points this time. Since I think I got what is the main narrative out, I am now just going back with a quote-unquote fine-tooth comb of my memory and inserting what I think or feel I might have forgotten. When I first arrived to the second unit, I had a roommate who could not really get out of bed. She was in a wheelchair and clearly needed assistance. Something was wrong with her feet and her back, and she told me that she had an obstructed large intestine. And she had not been able to defecate for days and days and days, and was getting no assistance in and out of her wheelchair, to and from anything, nothing. And so I and the other patients were coming alongside of her as much as possible. But she seemed to be getting no treatment at all. And there was one evening when she was not doing okay. She was sweating. I don't know how to describe it, but she was not okay. And she couldn't move. And it had been like that since earlier in the day. And when I had gone up to whoever I had gone up to at that time, I had seen and heard them say that she probably needed an enema, but they surely weren't going to be going back to do that. Just flat out refusing to go look and to treat. Praise God that the evening nurses, the nurses at night, moved differently, acted differently, chose to do what they needed to do, because around midnight, someone finally came in to give that woman an enema, and she was able to use the restroom and immediately began feeling better and doing better, but she was not okay prior to that. It was at dangerous levels. I found out later that she was also actually working through getting herself healthy from some different type of substance experiences, and that is neither here nor there, but it could contribute to why she had been being treated the way she had been, because that was my experience and what I had seen. People weren't being heard, people weren't being listened to, people weren't being checked on and assisted and treated, people weren't being helped. They were just being given their food and their pills and left to their own devices. Also, when I said that I made friends and built relationships with all of the patients, I mean that, including the patients who wronged me. The gentleman who exposed himself to me was never removed from the unit, and after several days did seem to come back to himself. Considering what I went through, I gave room for the possibility that perhaps he had gone through a similar experience. And I approached him, and I asked him if he was feeling better, and he said yes, and I said I'm glad, because it was kind of scary, and he did not seem to have a recollection of the time, and I did not go into any detail, but I explained to the man that when he had first got here, he had been in a very different mindset, and it had been very scary, and scary specifically for me, and that I had been made nervous and didn't feel safe. And that man apologized to me genuinely. I don't know how to explain it other than that. I believed it to be genuine, and I experienced it to be genuine from then on. So I told him I forgave him, and I did not become close with this man. I didn't build a deep bond with him, but every time I saw him, it was cordial, and how are you, checking in on each other, and praying for each other. There was a lot of division in the unit. All of the same things that you see in the world, just exasperated so much. Racism, classism, religious discrimination, one culture distrusting another culture, one way of loving distrusting another way of loving. Like, it was just all of the same tactics of slander, division, the thief of joy, all of the things that Satan does in the world were happening at just the tiniest but also most enormous scale possible in this space. And there were no resources to appropriately manage it. No, not at all. There was no interpreter for somebody who might not speak English. There was no chaplain or rabbi or imam available for people to speak with. There was no financial advisors, patient advocate. The number for the patient advocate that was posted did not call the person that it said it called. And just getting to a phone to be able to do that was a lot. It took a full 24 hours of demanding printouts of my patient rights and some other copies of things such as my medication and its molecular structure and the like before I received them. So I was forced to take the medications before I received the education on it properly. And I had so many conversations with people where they would say, how can you talk to or trust this person when they insert the blank? And my answer was always, I only see God's people here, and all of us are in our own wrestling and our own contentions. And there is only one God. There's only one God, and that God is good all the time. All the time, God is good. So if it is not good, it cannot be of God, and it needs to be contended with and wrestled with and removed. But I care about the heart like my God says he cares about the heart. She cares about the heart. They care about the heart. Elohim, Ruach HaKodesh, and Yahshua HaMashiach. I cling to the Holy Trinity. And I saw people doing their best to do the same constantly. But it was so volatile because the environment was so volatile. As soon as people got to some type of grounding, something would happen that would throw anybody off. So I have nothing but room and grace for anything and everything I experienced from everybody in there. Both the good, the bad, the positive, all of it. Like, that was the valley of the shadow of death. And people's angels and demons, so to speak, all of it was just laid bare. Whoever you were in there is who you are. Like, at least that's how my brain is seeing it. When the fight broke out, when the riot broke out, the big one, somebody definitely hit me in the stomach when they were running around doing what they're doing. And I know for a fact that it wasn't intentional. But I confronted that also, and I received apologies for that also. Anything that happened to me with patients, with one exception that doesn't really matter to me. There's one exception, but I'm not worried about it. Every other patient, so I'm going to act like it's in totality, both with patients and with staff. Because I got numerous apologies from staff too. I actually experienced being received and then contended with, and then reconciled with, and forgiving, and all of those things that God calls us to with all of the patients to various degrees in that space. And there are people in there who have been captive for far too long. This needs to be handled quickly. Okay, this is my last note for this morning because when I was listening back, I realized that there's actually two people that are kind of exceptions. But the reason why my brain only thought one at first is because in one instance, there is a man in there, or was when I left, who is actually just flat out dangerous. That's all I can say on that. But my experience with this man personally was that when I stood my ground, he did not push past my authority when I stood in it. He left me alone, is what I'm saying. But there was one person where once I had to stand in my authority and stand in truth, it just severed the connection, essentially. And I did not really speak to that person again unless I absolutely had to, and it was contentious whenever I did, so I just completely avoided it. I don't know if that matters at all. I'm just really trying to be thorough while my brain is clear and while these things are fresh, and get everything out and down that I can think to.